empty streets, closed shops, and events cancelled. COVID put the economy into an induced coma, with output falling 20% in a single quarter. Yet, a bit like a case of long COVID, the economy has failed to bounce back. Even before COVID, the economy was struggling. 13 years of below-trend growth. But when COVID hit, the economy was pushed over the edge, and the UK's weak economic growth declined to a complete stagnation. The pandemic was also a factor behind the unexpected return of inflation, a surge in government borrowing, and the general sense that life was getting worse. If COVID was a stress test for the economy, it was a test but it failed to pass. The first impact of COVID was a decline in life expectancy for the first time since a major war. In the UK, there were 227,000 deaths, with COVID listed as a cause. Average death rates were 5% up on the previous period. In that sense, the UK was not an international outlier. The US, for example, had much higher excess death rates. But a bigger concern has been the lingering poor health, a decline in healthy life expectancy, and a rise in long-term sickness rates that has left people scratching their heads. Long COVID is a problem, but it doesn't quite explain the surge in people not working due to ill health. And here the UK is something of an outlier. The UK is alone in failing to recover its pre-COVID participation rate. To what extent is COVID to blame for less people working? Some argue that the period of lockdowns led to a reassessment of your work-life balance. You could even argue this was a benefit of COVID. No longer are we slaves to the corporate world, but free to pursue other objectives. But after COVID, a new generation of especially young workers undeniably have a different attitude to work, less willing to work long hours, more willing to phone in sick, and firms have often struggled to recruit workers. With low productivity growth, real wage growth has been disappointing. In 2022, inflation surged at the end of global lockdowns. COVID lockdowns had distorted supply chains and demand, and when economies reopened, it led to a surge in the price of shipping and many durable goods. In addition, the COVID-induced recession had led to unprecedented monetary stimulus, ultra-low interest rates, and quantitative easing. So the combination of supply constraints, easy money, plus the excess savings of lockdowns and a bit of greedflation by firms led to inflation rising to the highest level since the 1990s. And then, of course, the Ukraine war pushed inflation even higher. After a decade of austerity in the 2010s, many public services had been squeezed, with a growth in NHS waiting lists and low levels of investment in public services. COVID magnified all these crises as NHS waiting lists surged, but also it led to higher waiting lists for criminal court cases and a growth in the backlog of maintenance in the NHS. By 2024, the National Audit Office said the UK total maintenance backlog was now at £49 billion. Problems keep stacking up. Basically, there was no margin for any kind of crisis. So when a crisis came along, services were overwhelmed. During lockdown, there was an organised clap for carers as people went out to offer their appreciation. But medical staff would almost certainly have swapped this gesture for a real wage increase. Overworked and underpaid, nurses in 2022 had wages 9% lower in real terms than 2010. But with the government putting the economy in lockdown, the mantra of austerity was replaced with an unprecedented $373 billion of state support, 13% of national output, the second biggest rescue package in the world, an extra $90 billion for health, but $190 billion for supporting households and business. After years of penny pinching, the government went to the other extreme. Furlough payments alone cost $70 billion. The coronavirus job retention scheme was supposed to be 80% of the average monthly salary of $2,500, but officials misread it as 100% of $2,500. But a few billion wasted on an administrative mistake was nothing compared to the billions wasted on extravagant PPE contracts. Ministers panicked at running out early in the pandemic and so they literally threw money at the problem. Accounts reveal that of the $13.6 billion spent on PPE, $10 billion was unused and written off. And this includes so-called VIP lanes, i.e. friends of the government, who were offered preferential contracts and paid up to 80% more than traditional routes, the kind of corruption which undermined the sense of national solidarity engendered in the early days of the pandemic. During the 2017 election, Theresa May had famously told the country there was no magic money tree. But in COVID, this seemed to be suddenly a very different story. Arguably, it further changed attitudes to government spending. In 2022, the Prime Minister Liz Truss prepared a potential $200 billion bailout for rising energy prices. Yet no one remembers this unprecedented largesse. She was kicked out of office within a few months for crashing the financial markets. Between 2019 and 2024, the UK had the largest rise in public debt in the G7 and is on a pathway of deteriorating public finances. Going back to the rise in long-term sickness, a House of Lords report found there was no real evidence of a worsening health in the population as a whole, but they did find an incentive to be classified as sick, and want in receipt of benefits looking for work could be counterproductive. Did COVID make us more willing to seek government benefits? Now, not everyone accepts this assertion that health has not deteriorated. For example, some point to the rise in mental health issues, especially amongst young people, partly attributed to the impact of isolation during lockdown. But whatever the reason, it is a fact that 1.2 million more people claim health-related benefits in 2025 than in February 2020. It means the UK spends $65 billion on incapacity and disability benefits, and this is set to rise a lot in the coming years. The problem is that the combination of higher public debt and also the return of inflation shattered the easy money of the 2010s. With inflation back with a vengeance, debt interest payments doubled overnight. Interest payments went from 40 to 100 billion, and suddenly we had to increase taxes just to pay the interest. Tax as a share of GDP has risen to a record level in recent years, but without ever getting on top of all the shortages in public services. COVID was certainly not the only factor, but it certainly magnified the problem. Now, COVID has also been blamed for changing attitudes. Lockdown, social isolation arguably contributed to changing attitudes to work, life, even fertility rates, with global fertility rates falling even more during COVID. It would certainly be a mistake to blame all these behavioural trends on COVID, which arguably many started before. Using research from Understanding America's survey, there has been a change in the attitudes of young people, a decline in conscientiousness, a rise in neuroticism, a decline in agreeableness. Not only that, but more easily distracted, less likely to persevere. Perhaps, though, this reflects the rise in smartphones and use of social media since the 2016 explosion. But you could argue that COVID and lockdowns magnified our use of this digital world. The Zoom workplace, checking everything online, a habit that has proved very difficult to unwind and roll back. Another striking feature of the COVID period was a rise in housing costs. In the UK, like many countries, COVID led to a boom in house prices. Ultra-low interest rates, greater savings, desire for more space, house prices surged, exacerbating the gap between homeowners and non-homeowners. Now, house prices have moderated in recent years, but rents haven't. Now, the reason for rising rents can't all be laid at the door of a pandemic. It's more a reflection of the rising population and limited supply. But that period was undoubtedly bad for renters. Were there any positive aspects of COVID? Well, there was a sense of being part of a national emergency. We're all in it together, making sacrifices for the greater good. Clapping carers may have been gesture politics, but there was a very real appreciation for the unsung heroes of society. And after all, it seemed like we could live without management consultants and investment bankers, but not doctors, care workers and supermarket staff. Yet this sense of national unity was undermined by a political class who exceeded their own low expectations. Boris Johnson's parties in Downing Street were a stark case of we don't follow the rules, we only make them. Then there was Dominic Cummings' 400-mile drive to Northumberland to test his eyesight or something like that. And then underneath this sense of unity, it was also a time when fringe conspiracy worldviews became more mainstream. Everything from COVID was not real to being caused by 5G or a big plot by Big Pharma or the Chinese or Americans, whatever fits into your worldview. Without delving into that murky world, COVID has also coincided with a decline in trust in big institutions, dare we say democracy. In America at least, take-up of other vaccines has fallen, leading to a resurgence in childhood diseases like measles. During COVID lockdowns, many types of crime fell. The opportunities were not there. Since the end of COVID, there's been a sharp rise in shoplifting, even though official statistics underestimate actual cases. Whether COVID changed anything of a social fabric, the sense of community, sense of responsibility, is still an open question. COVID, lockdowns, daily briefings from Number 10 all seem like in the distant past, yet it was just 3 years ago since the end of that period. And it continues to cast a shadow over the economy and society. Of course, it would be a mistake to place all the blame on COVID, but perhaps more than anything, it placed a stress on life and found multiple weaknesses. So far, the economy is yet to bounce back stronger. Ironically, the Spanish flu of 1918 to 19 was far more deadly, but had much more limited impact. Outside of the UK, many economies thrived after the end of the First World War. So although things have gotten bad since COVID, there is always a chance that things will get better soon. And is it really true that the young are not wanting to work? This video looks at the new epidemic of people not working. Thanks for watching. Do consider subscribing and see you soon.